In a single afternoon, the United States Senate can pass a multi-trillion-dollar economic overhaul.
Right.
An overhaul that fundamentally rewrites your tax code, slashes the social safety net, and literally reshapes global energy markets.
Yeah, all in one go. And then, in the exact same breath, they can mandate the architectural shape of the apartment building down your street.
Exactly. And then they pause to unanimously celebrate a New York Knicks NBA championship.
It's dizzying. The scale of it all is just, it's hard to wrap your head around.
It really is. You are looking at a system that is capable of this intense shared humanity, but also absolute unyielding partisan warfare.
And all of it is happening on the exact same carpet.
Yeah, exactly. So today we are wading right into that duality. Welcome to a special Congress in Context edition of our deep dive.
We're tackling an unprecedented stack of recent congressional documents that you all sent our way.
Yeah, we are parsing through everything from the sprawling H.R. 1 Reconciliation Act all the way to the raw, really fiery Senate floor debates from Wednesday, June 17th, 2026.
And our mission here is to distill the critical implications for your daily life, your wallet, and your community.
Because whether you like it or not, this machinery dictates how your world operates.
Absolutely. But to set the baseline for our analysis today, we really need to address the nature of these sources first.
Right, that's super important.
Because we are examining legislation and floor transcripts that contain highly charged, deeply polarizing political content.
Oh, yeah. Very charged.
You are going to hear arguments rooted in both staunchly conservative and progressively liberal ideologies today.
And our commitment to you is strictly impartial analysis. We are not here to take sides.
No, not at all. We do not endorse the viewpoints of the politicians or the legislation that we unpack.
Our objective is just to impartially report on the contents of these documents.
Right, to explain the underlying mechanisms at play and help you comprehend the ideas and strategies contained in the original source material.
Because we want you fully equipped to understand the whole board, not just the individual pieces. And just a brief housekeeping note before we really jump in. This deep dive is a completely independent, ad-free civic education project.
Completely ad-free.
Yeah. We rely entirely on the support of listeners like you to keep this research flowing.
So if you find this breakdown valuable, please consider supporting the production infrastructure by using the Buy Me a Coffee link,
which is located right down in your app's show notes. It genuinely keeps this whole endeavor alive.
It really does. So looking at the sheer volume of legislation in front of us today, the scope is just sweeping.
It's massive. We are looking at fundamental changes to crop insurance, the military, college sports, housing, the tax code.
And even the ethical rules governing the lawmakers themselves.
Yeah. I think the best functional analogy for this legislative landscape right now is a policy pendulum.
But this isn't, a gentle rhythmic swing.
No. This pendulum is swinging with ferocious disruptive force. It's aggressively sweeping away the prior administration's legacy.
Right, basically clearing the ground for the current one's priorities.
And the heaviest weight driving that pendulum right now is H.R. 1, which is also known as the Reconciliation Act of 2025.
Yeah, and we should be clear, this isn't just a regular bill. It is a fiscal earthquake.
That's a good way to put it. According to our sources, H.R. 1 is inextricably linked to H.Con. Res. 14, which is a budget blueprint.
Right, and we really need to explain the machinery of this because the financial scale we're talking about is staggering.
It is. So to understand this machinery, you have to understand a process called reconciliation.
Right, because in the Senate, most legislation requires 60 votes to overcome a filibuster.
And in a deeply divided government, finding 60 votes is, it's nearly impossible.
Exactly. So reconciliation is this special, fast-track legislative vehicle.
And it allows the majority party to bypass that 60-vote threshold completely, right?
Yes, it only requires a simple majority. So
yeah.
It's 51 votes or 50 plus the vice president's tiebreaker.
Wow. But that immense power comes with a pretty strict constraint, doesn't it?
It does. Every single provision in a reconciliation bill must have a direct, measurable impact on the federal budget.
So you can't just use it to pass purely social policy.
No, you can't.
It's sort of like trying to fit a grand piano through a dog door.
That is a perfect analogy.
You have these massive, sweeping policy ambitions, but to get them past the Senate parliamentarian, who basically enforces the rules, you have to chop those policies up.
Right, into strictly mathematical budgetary pieces.
And the budget blueprint setting the rules for this specific piano, H.Con. Res. 14, It creates this mind-bending mathematical dynamic.
It really does. The resolution explicitly directs various congressional committees to cut mandatory spending by $2 trillion over the next decade.
$2 trillion in cuts.
Yes. Yet, in the very same document, it instructs the Ways and Means committees, the folks who architect the tax code, to propose changes that actually increase the deficit.
High up to $4.5 trillion.
Right, exactly. While also raising the statutory debt limit by $5 trillion.
Okay, let me just push back on the core logic here, because my brain immediately flags a massive contradiction.
All for it.
If the stated policy goal in this resolution is deficit reduction, and the text explicitly calls for reducing mandatory spending to, relieve government bureaucracy,
Right.
how does the underlying math square $2 trillion in painful spending cuts with a $4.5 trillion allowance for tax cuts?
It's a great question.
Because the net result of that is just a much larger deficit.
Right, and that tension you're identifying sits at the very heart of the economic philosophy driving this entire piece of legislation.
Okay.
You're basically looking at a profound clash of macroeconomic theories. The architects of this bill are operating on a hybrid model.
What does that hybrid look like?
Well, one side of that model is the starve the beast philosophy.
Just repeat straight.
Yeah. It's the conviction that the only way to permanently shrink the size and reach of the federal government is to choke off its revenue stream.
And force deep cuts to its mandatory programs.
Exactly. But the other side is aggressive supply-side economics.
Okay, so the trickle-down concept.
Right. The proponents of H.R. 1 argue that these massive tax cuts will stimulate unprecedented free market activity, corporate investment, and job creation.
So they're making a bet.
A high-stakes, multi-trillion-dollar bet. They're banking that the resulting economic boom will generate enough new tax revenue down the line to eventually offset those massive upfront deficit increases.
The ones they are legally authorizing today.
Yes.
So they are basically clearing a $4.5 trillion runway to let these tax shifts take off.
Exactly.
And these aren't just, abstract corporate rate tweaks. Sources detail highly specific provisions designed to show up immediately on your W-2.
Right. They are making the 2017 individual tax cuts permanent and increasing the standard deduction.
But the targeted provisions are where it gets really fascinating. We are looking at no tax on tips, which is an exclusion of up to $25,000 for tipped workers.
Yeah.
And then there's no tax on overtime.
And that overtime provision has seismic implications for the labor force.
How so? Break that down.
Well, the legislation permits a deduction of up to $12,500 for a single filer or $25,000 for joint filers, specifically on FLSA-required overtime.
We should definitely define FLSA for clarity.
Good call. The Fair Labor Standards Act, or FLSA, is the federal law that mandates employers pay time and a half for hours worked over 40 in a single work week.
Okay.
So if you're a nurse pulling double shifts, a factory worker, or a first responder logging heavy overtime,
a significant portion of your hardest-earned premium rate pay becomes entirely exempt from federal income tax.
Exactly. It dramatically alters the incentive structure for hourly workers to pick up extra shifts.
Wow. And it also completely changes the calculus for businesses projecting their labor costs, I imagine.
Absolutely.
Alongside that, there's a temporary exclusion for up to $10,000 of interest paid on new car loans.
Which is clearly aimed at stimulating the auto industry amid these high interest rates.
Right. But Title I of this bill introduces something entirely novel called Trump Accounts for Minors. This reads like a federal trust fund starter kit.
It does. It is a radical experiment in establishing generational wealth baselines right from birth.
How does the pilot program actually work?
So the legislation outlines establishing a brand new type of individual retirement account for eligible children born between 2025 and 2028.
Okay, so a very specific window.
Right. The federal government will literally deposit a $1,000 tax payment directly into these accounts.
Just a straight deposit to kick it off.
Yes. And from there, it allows for tax-advantaged contributions of up to $5,000 a year.
And the funds can't be touched without penalty until the child reaches 18, generally speaking?
Correct. It is a structural attempt to ensure a baseline of compounding interest for the next generation.
That's massive. But while they are seeding future accounts in Title I, the policy pendulum swings back with lethal force in Title VI.
Yeah, Title VI focuses on energy and the environment.
And H.R. 1 is an explicit, systematic dismantling of the previous administration's climate legacy.
It really is. It rolls back the Green New Deal subsidies established in the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act.
The text details the repeal of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, the termination of tax credits for purchasing clean vehicles, and the end of energy-efficient home improvement credits.
The reconciliation mechanism is essentially acting as an eraser here.
An eraser, right.
Yeah. They're rescinding billions of dollars in unobligated funds from that 2022 legislation.
And simultaneously, they are pivoting federal policy hard toward aggressive fossil fuel extraction.
Very hard. The legislation mandates the resumption of onshore and offshore oil and gas lease sales.
It removes administrative delays and actually forces minimum offshore sales in the Gulf of Mexico.
Right, dictating 30 sales through the year 2040.
And furthermore, it explicitly mandates at least 4 area-wide lease sales in the highly contested Alaska coastal plain over the next decade.
And buried in those energy provisions is a line lowering the federal coal royalty rate from 12.5% down to 7%.
Now, a 5.5% drop might sound marginal in casual conversation.
Right, like it's just a few percentage points.
But in the context of federal resource extraction, that represents millions of dollars in corporate margin for the mining industry.
And a corresponding drop in federal revenue.
Exactly.
Which perfectly illustrates the volatility of legislating via reconciliation.
Because a massive green energy subsidy framework is built using reconciliation in 2022.
And just a few years later, the exact same procedural tool is used to rip that framework out by the roots.
And replace it with fossil fuel mandates. It creates this regulatory whiplash.
It really does. Consider the position of a solar panel manufacturer or a major auto executive planning a 10-year transition to electric vehicles.
Right, making long-term capital investments becomes incredibly precarious.
Because the underlying federal incentive structure completely reverses the moment the Senate majority flips.
You are basically building factories on legislative quicksand.
Quicksand, yeah.
And that aggressive reshuffling continues when we examine the provisions covering immigration and the border.
The appropriations here are just staggering.
The bill allocates $46.5 billion for border barriers.
And $45 billion to expand ICE detention capacity.
But the structural change that really demands our attention is the implementation of a massive new user fee system in Title X.
We are witnessing a profound philosophical shift in how the government funds its operations here.
How so?
Well, historically, many aspects of the immigration and judicial system were funded by the general taxpayer base.
Right.
H.R. 1 shifts that financial burden directly onto the individuals who are navigating the system.
And the new fee structure is steep.
Very steep. The bill establishes a $1,000 fee for aliens paroled into the U.S.
Wow.
It also implements an annual $100 fee simply to keep an asylum application pending in the backlog.
Just to stay in the waiting room, essentially.
Exactly.
And the penalties for avoiding the system are also monetized. There is a $5,000 fee instituted for aliens ordered removed in absentia.
Meaning they miss their court date.
Right, who are subsequently arrested. And there is an additional $5,000 fee for inadmissible aliens apprehended between official ports of entry.
This builds a severe financial penalty directly into the physical apprehension process.
So when you zoom out, the strategy is really twofold, isn't it?
It is. It's to offset the enormous costs of the $45 billion ICE expansion by tapping the users of the system,
while simultaneously creating financial deterrents meant to discourage undocumented entry and extended legal appeals.
Right. But, to hit that required $2 trillion deficit reduction target we talked about at the beginning, the committees had to look way beyond user fees.
They took an axe to the social safety net.
They really did. H.R. 1 places severe new restrictions on eligibility for SNAP, what is widely known as food stamps and Medicaid.
For non-citizens, access to these programs is being drastically curtailed.
And for citizens, the bill institutes an 80-hour per month work, community service, or education requirement for certain populations under the Medicaid expansion.
Okay, but the mechanism they use for SNAP is particularly insidious from an economic standpoint, isn't it?
Yes. The bill alters how the USDA evaluates the Thrifty food plan.
We really need to define this because it sounds like, bureaucratic jargon, but it actually dictates survival for millions of people.
It does. The Thrifty food plan is the mathematical baseline the government uses to calculate the absolute minimum cost of a nutritious diet.
It dictates exactly how much money a family receives in their monthly SNAP benefits.
Exactly. And by legally preventing cost increases to the Thrifty food plan based on future reevaluations.
Congress is effectively freezing the benefit baseline.
Yes.
which means as inflation drives up the cost of a carton of eggs or a loaf of bread, the purchasing power of the SMFP recipient steadily erodes.
Because the government's calculation is legally barred from keeping up with reality.
That is heavy. Before we pivot away from H.R. 1 entirely, we have to acknowledge the gravity of what passing this grand piano through the dog door actually means in practice.
I do.
When you combine frozen SNFP calculations with stringent new Medicaid work requirements, you are fundamentally altering the survival calculus for vulnerable communities.
That is the human reality of hitting a $2 trillion deficit reduction target via reconciliation. It is austere, and it is very immediate.
It is a stark reminder that the budget resolution isn't just numbers on a page.
No, it is the structural blueprint for American society.
Okay, let's take a breath and shift our focus to something that feels, on its surface at least, a bit more collaborative.
Though it still represents an incredible flex of top-down federal power.
Yes, it does. We are looking at H.R. 6644, the Housing for the 21st Century Act.
Right, and housing affordability is the rare crisis that inflicts pain universally across the political spectrum.
Oh, totally. Whether you are in a deep blue coastal city or a rapidly expanding red Sunbelt suburb, the math of buying or renting a home is just broken.
And this legislation represents a bipartisan feeling push to tackle the supply side of that equation.
And the federal government is doing so by getting incredibly granular about what the streets in your neighborhood actually look like.
Very granular.
The bill directs the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, to publish guidelines that push local municipalities to reduce parking minimums.
And eliminate restrictions on accessory dwelling units, or ADUs.
So we are talking about granny flats, basement apartments, backyard cottages.
Right. But the provision that is truly transformative centers on a phrase called point access block buildings.
Point access block? That sounds very technical. What is it?
Well, the bill explicitly requires HUD to issue guidelines for these residential buildings to aggressively facilitate their local permitting.
So to translate the architectural jargon into your reality, in much of the United States, building codes demand that any multi-story apartment building have 2 separate staircases for fire safety.
Yes, the two-stair rule.
And when a developer has to fit 2 staircases into a floor plan, it usually dictates a specific architectural shape, right? The double-loaded corridor.
Exactly. Picture a standard hotel, a long, windowless hallway down the middle, with identical single-exposure apartments flanked on either side.
Right. But a point access block is entirely different.
It is. It is a mid-rise building, maybe 4 or 5 stories tall, structured around a single central staircase and an elevator.
This design is ubiquitous across Europe and much of Asia.
But largely zoned out of existence in North America.
And that geometry completely changes the housing market, doesn't it?
It does, because when you only need 1 staircase, you can build on a much smaller plot of land.
You don't need a developer to buy out an entire city block and bulldoze it to fit a massive double-loaded corridor complex.
Exactly. You can slip a beautiful, dense 5-story building right onto a standard residential lot.
And because the apartments wrap around the central stair, you get family-sized 3 or 4 bedroom units with windows on 3 sides.
Which offers cross-ventilation and natural light. It fundamentally increases the supply of livable, family-oriented density.
Which is the exact mechanism needed to drastically lower rent.
Yes. And to accelerate this shift, H.R. 6644 establishes a grant program incentivizing local governments to adopt pre-reviewed designs.
Essentially federal pattern books.
Right. If a developer uses a pre-approved point access block design, their permit gets fast-tracked.
Furthermore, the bill streamlines environmental reviews under NEPA for these housing projects.
NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, traditionally requires exhaustive, years-long environmental impact studies for developments.
So streamlining it for housing means developers bypass years of costly red tape.
Exactly.
It's fascinating. We just saw H.R. 1 cut federal spending, but here in H.R. 6644, we are witnessing the federal government essentially bribe local zoning boards.
Bribe is a strong word, but the incentives are massive.
Washington is looking at local town councils and saying, your restrictive zoning laws are strangling the national economy. We are going to offer you grants to get out of the way.
And if you adopt our single-stair blueprints, we will waive the environmental regulation.
It is a massive intervention overriding local control.
It highlights a deep frustration at the federal level with the slow, restrictive pace of local municipal governance.
Okay, continuing with the theme of massive structural shifts affecting everyday life, let's look at S 4668, the Protect College Sports Act of 2026.
This bill fundamentally dismantles the illusion of amateurism we've been clinging to for decades.
The cultural institution of college athletics, the Saturday tailgates, the marching bands, it has always been underpinned by a multi-billion-dollar broadcasting and merchandising industry.
Right. And for generations, the NCAA maintained strict rules ensuring the primary labor force generating those billions, the athletes, remained uncompensated amateurs.
But S 4668 shatters that model at the federal level.
It completely federalizes NIL, which stands for Name, Image, and Likeness Rights.
The bill explicitly prohibits universities or athletic conferences from restricting a student-athlete's ability to sign NIL agreements.
But it also institutes guardrails for this new labor market.
Yeah, like what?
Well, it caps sports agent fees at 5% for endorsement contracts, protecting 19-year-olds from predatory representation.
That makes sense.
It also includes a provision that prohibits college football coaches from breaking their contracts to jump ship to another program mid-season.
Which is a practice that drives fans and athletic directors completely insane.
Oh, absolutely. But the true paradigm shift lies in the mandated welfare protections.
Okay, tell me about that.
S 4668 requires Division I institutions to cover out-of-pocket medical expenses for sports-related injuries.
And crucially, this coverage extends not just while the athlete is actively enrolled in playing.
Correct. It extends for a full 5 years post-eligibility.
Consider the second-order effects of that mandate. Picture a 21-year-old linebacker who suffers a severe concussion or tears an ACL in their senior year.
Right. Under the old system, once their eligibility expired, they were often left to navigate the long-term healthcare system on their own.
But under this law, the university remains financially liable for their sports-related medical care until they're 26 or 27 years old.
Congress is treating these athletes not as students playing a game, but as highly specialized, highly vulnerable laborers.
And in doing so, they are transforming universities into long-term healthcare insurers for injuries like CTE.
It is the formal transition of the college athlete into a protected economic actor.
And the financial burden placed on athletic departments will be immense, I imagine.
Very much so. It's likely accelerating the consolidation of powerhouse superconferences that can actually afford those insurance premiums.
So we just explored how the federal government is heavily intervening in local zoning in college football.
Right.
But when you look at the next two bills in our stack, the irony is really thick.
How do you mean?
Because while Congress projects power outward, S 2885 and S 2877 represent dramatic attempts to strip power and wealth away from the politicians themselves.
Ah, yes. We are looking at legislation attempting to address a profound crisis of institutional trust.
Let's examine S 2885 first, the Redistricting Reform Act.
Okay. So, the U.S. Constitution leaves the drawing of congressional district maps largely up to individual state legislatures.
And historically, whichever party controls the state house draws the maps to mathematically guarantee their own party wins the maximum number of seats.
Which is a practice known as partisan gerrymandering.
But S 2885 takes a sledgehammer to that tradition.
It really does. It mandates that all states must use 15-member independent redistricting commissions to draw their congressional maps.
It explicitly strips the map-making pen right out of the hands of state lawmakers.
Exactly. It outright bans mid-decade redistricting so a party can't redraw the lines just because they won a midterm election.
And it bans partisan gerrymandering outright.
Yes, and it even dictates strict, ranked criteria for the commissions.
Like what? What are the rules?
Equal population must be the first priority. Compliance with the Voting Rights Act is second. And preserving communities of interest is third.
And the bill explicitly excludes political party affiliation from the definition of a community of interest.
Right. And if a state's independent commission deadlocks or fails to produce a compliant map, the legislation dictates that a 3-judge federal court will step in and draw it for them.
It is basically a massive transfer of
Electoral authority.
right, from state politicians to independent citizens and federal judges.
Huge, huge shift.
And if taking away their electoral maps wasn't enough, S 2877, the No Stock Act, comes directly for their wallets.
Yes, this bill enacts a total prohibition on stock, cryptocurrency, and futures trading for members of Congress, the president, the vice president, Supreme Court justices, Federal Reserve governors, and crucially, their spouses, and dependent children.
The definition of covered financial interests is exhaustive.
It covers individual corporate securities, commodities, futures, meme coins, NFTs. It is a blanket ban on the individual trading of specific assets.
But the divestiture window is the most jarring part for me.
The 120 days.
Yes. If enacted, lawmakers have exactly 120 days to sell existing covered interests, or 120 days from taking the oath of office if newly elected.
It's an incredibly tight timeline.
Let's visualize this. You are a newly elected senator with a 30-year career in the private sector. You have a carefully managed, multi-million-dollar portfolio. This bill forces you to liquidate that entire portfolio within 4 months, likely triggering massive capital gains taxes simply for the privilege of serving in government.
That's the reality of the text.
What is the historical precedent for Congress voluntarily regulating its own personal wealth to this draconian degree?
There is virtually zero historical precedent for this level of prohibition.
None.
A decade ago, Congress passed the State Joke Act of 2012, which was designed to prevent insider trading. But that law relied entirely on transparency and disclosure.
Meaning they could still trade, they just had to tell us.
Right. Members were allowed to trade, but they had to publicly report those trades within 45 days. It did not ban the ownership of the assets.
So S-2877 is a monumental escalation from disclosure to absolute prohibition.
It is. The pressure driving this is the undeniable optics problem.
The public has watched lawmakers who regulate massive tech companies, pharmaceutical giants, and the defense industry simultaneously hold millions of dollars in stock in those exact same corporations.
The conflict of interest is structural.
But my deep skepticism lies in the enforcement. Are a group of multimillionaire politicians actually going to vote to gut their own family's financial architecture?
It's a fair question.
Or is this just a messaging bill designed to produce a great campaign commercial before dying quietly in a subcommittee?
The political incentives do suggest it is a messaging bill. However, populist pressure from both the far left and the far right has really aligned on this specific issue.
So they might be forced into it.
The outrage against elite institutional wealth is so high that forcing a floor vote on the No Stock Act could corner lawmakers into supporting it out of sheer political self-preservation.
We will definitely have to watch the roll call on that one with a microscope. Now, before we transition to the raw emotions of the Senate floor debates, there are a few smaller, highly technical bills in this stack that carry massive real-world implications for specific communities.
Yes. Let's examine S-2886, the America's Children Act.
This legislation addresses a devastating administrative loophole in the legal immigration system.
Currently, thousands of high-skilled workers are in the U.S. legally on employment-based visas, like the H-1B.
Right. And they bring their children with them, who are granted derivative visa status.
These children grow up at American schools, integrate into American culture, and often know no other home.
But the system has a ticking clock. The moment that child turns 21, they essentially age out of their derivative status.
Even if their parents have been legally waiting in a decades-long administrative backlog for a permanent green card, the 21-year-old child suddenly loses their legal right to remain in the country.
They face imminent self-deportation away from their family. It's a bureaucratic nightmare.
S-2886 fixes this by freezing the child's age for immigration purposes based on the date their parents' initial petition was filed.
So it stops the clock.
It stops the clock.
Furthermore,
It creates a vital off-ramp.
what kind of off-ramp?
If that dependent child graduates from a U.S. institution of higher education and has maintained a continuous physical presence in the U.S. for at least 10 years.
The bill grants them a direct, independent pathway to permanent residency.
Exactly. It secures a future for a population that has lived their entire lives in legal limbo.
That's huge. We also have S-1954, the Biosimilar Red Tape Elimination Act.
This is a brilliant example of how stripping away a single layer of bureaucracy can alter an entire economic market.
It states that once a biosimilar drug is approved by the FDA as highly similar to a reference biologic drug, it is automatically deemed interchangeable.
We really need to explain the mechanics of the pharmacy counter to understand why this matters.
Okay, lay it out.
A biologic drug is a highly complex medicine, usually derived from living cells. Think of specialized treatments for rheumatoid arthritis or certain cancers.
Okay.
A biosimilar is a highly effective, less expensive alternative, much like a generic version of a chemical drug.
Right.
Previously, a drug manufacturer had to jump through an exhausting secondary set of clinical trials to prove to the FDA that their biosimilar was interchangeable.
And the distinction between similar and interchangeable is the real bottleneck.
Exactly. If a drug is just similar, a pharmacist cannot substitute the cheaper version for the expensive name brand without calling the prescribing doctor and getting explicit permission.
And in the real world, doctors are busy, calls go to voicemail, and the patient ends up paying for the expensive name brand just to get their medicine before the pharmacy closes.
Right. But by automatically deeming them interchangeable upon approval, S. 1954 removes the doctor phone call from the equation.
The pharmacist can instantly substitute the cheaper alternative.
It removes a massive barrier to market entry, injecting brutal competition into the pharmaceutical space.
Which is the fundamental mechanism required to actually lower prescription drug costs at the point of sale.
Exactly. And finally, in this batch, S. 1133 and S. 1146 propose bringing cameras into federal courts, including the Supreme Court of the United States.
They grant presiding judges the discretion to televise proceedings, implementing necessary safeguards to protect the identities of witnesses and jurors.
This represents a sea change in transparency.
Historically, the Supreme Court has fiercely resisted cameras, arguing that broadcasting oral arguments would encourage grandstanding by attorneys or justices.
So the public is largely forced to rely on delayed audio recordings or printed transcripts.
Permitting live televised broadcasts fundamentally alters how the American public interacts with the judicial branch.
It demystifies the highest court in the land, turning abstract legal theory into observable, democratic reality.
It forces the judicial process out of the shadows and into the modern media landscape.
It really does.
Okay, we've examined the legislation on paper. Now we are going to step onto the floor of the United States Senate.
Our sources include the official, verbatim congressional record from Wednesday, June 17, 2026.
And reading through this transcript is an exercise in intense emotional whiplash.
We are going to map the human drama playing out in the chamber, dissecting the rhetoric, while of course maintaining our commitment to neutral reporting.
The session begins with a jarring injection of global volatility.
Senator John Thune addresses the chamber regarding a U.S. Army Apache helicopter that went down off the coast of Iran.
He details how the pilots were rescued by an unmanned sea drone, and he uses this specific incident to pivot immediately to the National Defense Authorization Act,
arguing forcefully for the necessity of heavy investments in unmanned and autonomous military systems.
The reality of the Middle East really hangs over the chamber, and the tension regarding Iran explodes shortly thereafter.
It does. Senator Chuck Schumer takes the floor, and the transcript reflects absolute fury.
He is demanding that the president immediately reveal the details of a secret deal that is allegedly being negotiated with the Iranian regime.
But notice how he frames the argument. He doesn't just talk about uranium enrichment.
No, he cites gas prices eclipsing $6 a gallon. He points to surging domestic inflation.
He calls the entire situation a cascading disaster that is actively bankrupting American farms with ballooning diesel costs and hurting families at the grocery store.
The counter-argument from across the aisle is swift and equally forceful. Senator Bernie Moreno takes the floor to respond.
He dismisses Schumer's accusations, asserting that the senator wasn't in the negotiation room and is operating on speculation.
Moreno's framing is entirely different. He asserts that the current administration is on the verge of brokering a historic peace agreement.
He argues that the ultimate goal is ensuring future generations of Americans live in a world that is not existentially threatened by a nuclear-armed Iranian regime.
Let's pause and unpack the machinery of this rhetoric. How do we analyze this clash neutrally? What are we actually watching happen on the floor?
You are watching two masterclass politicians perfectly illustrate how intricately foreign policy is bound to domestic economic anxiety. They are speaking to two entirely different but equally valid fears within the American electorate.
When Senator Schumer points to $6 gas, he is drawing a direct, visceral line between geopolitical instability in the Strait of Hormuz and the pain you feel when you fill up your car to drive to work.
He is prioritizing immediate economic suffering.
And when Senator Moreno points to the threat of a nuclear Iran, he is prioritizing long-term existential national security over short-term economic pain.
The floor debate is the unvarnished collision of those two deeply held anxieties.
The temperature stays incredibly high as the day progresses, culminating in a bitter procedural battle over what the record refers to as the slush fund.
Senator Jackie Rosen attempts to pass two bills, S. 4705 and S. 4704, using a parliamentary mechanism called unanimous consent.
She delivers a passionate speech claiming there is a $1.8 billion executive slush fund being hoarded by the president to reward political allies.
Her bills propose redirecting that money immediately to fund SNAP programs to feed hungry children and to provide emergency grants to local police departments facing critical staffing shortages.
And the moment she finishes, Senator Rick Scott stands and vigorously objects.
He flatly denies the existence of the fund, calling it a complete fiction.
But he doesn't just object, he uses his time to pivot the entire narrative.
Right. He blames the opposition party for causing sky-high healthcare costs, claiming that healthcare for a family of 4 has skyrocketed from $700 to over $25,000 in his lifetime.
He points out that the absolute minimum cost for a new car is now $20,000, explicitly blaming inflation on big government spending.
Now, when Senator Rosen uses unanimous consent, she's basically pulling a parliamentary stunt, right?
Exactly. Unanimous consent means a bill bypasses all committee hearings, all debate, and passes instantly, provided not a single senator objects.
But she knows, with 100% absolute certainty, that Senator Scott is standing 3 feet away, waiting at his desk to object.
So this maneuver isn't actually about passing a law to fund police or food stamps?
No, it's about forcing a political rival to play the villain on live television.
That is the precise utility of the maneuver. It is entirely about getting your colleagues on the record for campaign purposes.
By forcing the objection, Senator Rosen creates an immediate public record and a ready-made television ad showing a political opponent actively blocking funding for hungry children and law enforcement.
Conversely, Senator Scott understands the trap, which is why he uses his mandated objection time to instantly pivot the narrative away from the slush fund
and onto the crushing cost of living, getting his own campaign talking points regarding inflation and healthcare on the record.
It is high-stakes legislative theater.
It's weaponized procedure.
And the gravity of the rhetoric deepens when we look at a notable speech from Senator Jack Reed concerning the politicization of the military.
Senator Reed delivered a remarkably solemn warning to the chamber.
He argued that the sacred, apolitical nature of the United States military is actively being eroded by executive leadership.
To make his case, he specifically cited his speech given by the Secretary of Defense to the 2026 graduating class at West Point.
The quotes read into the record are jarring. According to Reed, the secretary used a commencement address at the nation's premier military academy to mock the service of female officers,
Actively criticize non-conservative political beliefs, and explicitly tell the cadets that the concept of strength and diversity is the single dumbest phrase in military history.
Reed's fundamental argument is one of institutional integrity.
He asserted that the unmatched strength of the American military relies entirely on the unwavering trust of the American people.
And that trust requires the military to remain fiercely above partisan politics, serving the Constitution rather than a specific political ideology.
Injecting culture war rhetoric and partisan grievances into a West Point address, according to Reed, violates that sacred trust and damages unit cohesion.
It is a heavy, unsettling moment in the transcript.
It really is.
But true to the incredible duality of Congress we established at the beginning of this deep dive, amidst all the vitriol over Iran, inflation, and the military, there are genuine, unfeigned moments of bipartisan unity on the floor that very same afternoon.
It is vital not to lose sight of that reality. The institution is still capable of shared humanity.
Just hours after screaming about a slush fund, the Senate unanimously agreed to S-Res 771.
This resolution was introduced by Senators Schumer and Gillibrand, and it joyously congratulates the New York Knicks on winning their first NBA title in 53 years.
The text specifically honors Jalen Brunson as the finals MVP, noting that he tied Michael Jordan's historic record for the most points scored in an away closeout game.
It also celebrates the unique chemistry of the Villanova trio, Brunson, Josh Hart, and McCall Bridges, winning both college and NBA championships together.
The official Congressional record literally notes that this victory united millions of New Yorkers with their grit and resilience.
It is a moment where intense regional pride completely overrides the bitter party lines drawn earlier in the day.
They also found common ground on science, unanimously passing S 4822, the Saving the OOI Act.
This was a joint effort led by Senator Jeff Merkley, a Democrat from Oregon, and Senator Lisa Murkowski, a Republican from Alaska.
It intervenes to protect the Ocean Observatories initiative.
This is a vital global network of over 900 highly advanced ocean weather sensors that monitor everything from subtle temperature shifts to phytoplankton blooms.
The bill legally blocks the National Science Foundation from decommissioning these crucial sensors without executing a comprehensive, peer-reviewed study first.
And finally, the chamber came together in a moment of quiet respect to pass SRES 776.
The resolution honors his astonishing 234 victories across NASCAR's National Series.
Fondly remembers his astonishing 234 victories across NASCAR's National Series.
Fondly remembers his polarizing rowdy persona that energized the sport and expresses the Senate's profound sorrow at his passing.
When you read that sequence of events in the record, it highlights a fundamental truth.
At the end of the day, these 100 senators are human beings representing the vastly varied interests, anxieties, and passions of their constituents.
Whether they are fiercely defending their local oceanography institutes, celebrating a basketball championship, or mourning a motorsports icon, they reflect the complex fabric of the country.
Having navigated the specific bills and the emotional terrain of the debates, we must transition to the broader context.
How do all these disparate pieces interact? And more importantly, why does the underlying process matter to you?
Let's bring this all the way back down to the mechanics of reconciliation, because earlier we described it as forcing a grand piano through a dog door.
Right.
I want to explain exactly how that mathematical mandate forces committees to make brutal policy choices.
The linchpin of the entire process is a mechanism called reconciliation instructions.
When the House and the Senate agree on a concurrent budget resolution, like HCon Res 14, they are not actually passing laws that the president signs.
They are establishing an internal binding framework for themselves. And buried deep within that framework are the instructions.
Think of it like a ruthless corporate mandate handed down from the board of directors to the department heads.
The budget resolution looks at the Committee on Agriculture and says, we don't care how you do it, but you are legally mandated to propose legislative changes within your jurisdiction that reduce the federal deficit by exactly X billion dollars.
It dictates the mathematical target, but leaves the brutal policy execution up to the committee.
Precisely. And that dynamic explains the massive policy shifts we witnessed in H.R. 1.
The Agriculture Committee looks at its vast portfolio, which includes massive corporate crop subsidies and forestry management.
But the largest single expenditure by far is SNAP nutrition assistance.
To hit the draconian deficit reduction target mandated by the board of directors, they are forced to open up the underlying statutes governing SNAP eligibility.
They restrict access for non-citizens, and they freeze the Thrifty food plan calculations.
The members of the committee aren't necessarily doing this because it represents their ideal, standalone legislative vision. Although certain factions certainly champion these cuts, ideologically they are executing these cuts because the unyielding mathematics of the reconciliation instructions demand it.
It is legislating by spreadsheet. You force the human policy to conform to the required math, not the other way around.
And we also have to recognize the historical perspective we are witnessing. The speed at which legacy-defining policies are being built up, only to be violently torn down, is unprecedented.
The unwinding of the previous administration's legislative legacy is remarkably aggressive.
As we discussed regarding Title VI of H.R. 1, they methodically rescinded billions in unobligated funds from the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act.
They repealed the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, rescinded funding for clean heavy-duty vehicles, and rolled back environmental justice block grants.
They utilized the exact same procedural sledgehammer reconciliation to undo what was constructed just a few years prior.
It forces you to question the permanence of any federal policy.
If massive investments in infrastructure or green energy can be ripped out by the roots the moment the Senate majority flips by a single seat, how can the private sector rely on the federal government as a stable partner?
They cannot. It fosters an incredibly volatile, unpredictable regulatory environment that inherently stifles long-term economic planning.
So we've covered the macro-level volatility. Now, let's connect the dots directly to your reality. What are the ripple effects of this legislative stack on your life?
The impacts are profound and highly targeted. Let's revisit the tax provisions.
Beyond tips and overtime, S. 2867, the Uplifting First-Time Homebuyers Act, fundamentally alters the mechanics of buying a house.
Historically, the law allowed you to withdraw a measly $10,000 from your IRA, penalty-free, to purchase your first home.
In the modern housing market, $10,000 barely covers the closing costs and inspection fees.
But S2860 has some rockets that limit up to $50,000.
That is a legitimate, market-altering down payment. If you have been diligently saving for retirement but are locked out of the housing market by high interest rates, this bill unlocks your own capital to bridge the gap.
Furthermore, H.R. 1 vastly expands the utility of 529 education savings accounts.
Previously, these tax-advantaged accounts were largely restricted to traditional college tuition.
The new legislation redefines qualified higher education expenses to include K-12 private tuition up to $20,000 a year.
Private tutoring, standardized test fees, and crucially, post-secondary credentialing for industry-recognized trades.
It is a massive deregulation of how families can spend tax-advantaged education dollars.
But we must acknowledge the flip side of this policy coin, particularly concerning marginalized communities.
The severe cuts to Medicaid and SNAP and H.R. 1 will have immediate, devastating impacts on families who rely on that safety net to survive.
You have to juxtapose that stark domestic contraction of resources with the actions Congress is taking on the international stage.
It's a jarring contrast. In this exact same stack of documents, we see S-1542, the Uyghur Policy Act.
This legislation forcefully and unequivocally condemns the People's Republic of China for ongoing genocide and horrific human rights abuses in Xinjiang.
It explicitly directs the State Department to fiercely advocate for the human rights of Uyghur Muslims abroad, utilizing the full diplomatic weight of the United States.
And domestically, we see highly specific protections enacted, such as S-1782, the Charlotte Woodward Organ Transplant Discrimination Prevention Act.
So the profoundly important bill ensures that individuals with mental or physical disabilities cannot be denied a life-saving organ transplant solely on the basis of their disability.
It mandates that medical boards explicitly recognize the role of an individual support network in providing necessary post-transplant care.
Congress demonstrates the capacity to expand profound, life-saving civil rights protections for specific vulnerable populations, while simultaneously utilizing arcane budget math to restrict basic nutritional and medical access for millions of others.
The duality of the institution is inescapable.
As we look toward future implications, we have to consider the inevitable ripple effects of the legislation currently pending.
The structural changes proposed in H.R. 1 and H.R. 6644 are so massive that they are virtually guaranteed to face intense, protracted legal challenges.
Take the NEPA streamlining we discussed in the Housing Bill. H.R. 1 goes even further, amending the National Environmental Policy Act to allow massive corporate project sponsors to pay opt-in fees in exchange for expedited environmental reviews.
Major environmental advocacy groups will undoubtedly file lawsuits immediately, arguing this establishes a corrupt pay-to-play system that fundamentally compromises the integrity of federal environmental assessments.
And regarding the mandates forcing aggressive fossil fuel leasing in the Alaska coastal plain and the Gulf of Mexico, we have witnessed decades of fierce litigation over drilling in those exact, highly sensitive ecological areas.
H.R. 1 attempts to legally mandate the extraction, but the federal courts will inevitably have the final say on the legality of those mandates.
There is also a broader, insidious trend emerging across these documents that demands our attention: the explosion of user fees.
Yes, this represents a subtle but profound structural shift in the philosophy of governance.
Throughout the text of H.R. 1, we observed Congress aggressively shifting the financial burden of maintaining government services away from the collective general tax base
And dropping it directly onto the specific individuals utilizing those services.
We saw it clearly in Title IV, which establishes new space launch and re-entry licensing fees.
If a commercial aerospace company is launching a rocket, they're now required to pay a hefty fee based directly on the weight of their payload in order to fund the FAA's Commercial Space Office.
We discussed the massive spikes in Title X regarding immigration court fees. The bill implements a staggering $900 fee simply to file an appeal of an immigration judge's decision,
and a $1,500 fee for a cancellation of removal application.
This trend forces a fundamental debate about the inherent nature of public services.
If expedited environmental reviews are quietly sold to the corporate project sponsor willing to pay an opt-in fee, and standard visa processing is entirely funded by exorbitant, punitive fees levied on the applicants, does the federal government cease to function as a collective public good?
Are we slowly transitioning into a fee-for-service corporation where access to the machinery of government is dictated entirely by an individual's ability to pay the toll?
That is a chilling trajectory, and it is a trend we are going to monitor obsessively on this deep dive.
We have covered an immense expanse of legislative terrain today.
We have unpacked trillion-dollar tax shifts, the geometry of single-stair housing, the death of amateurism in college sports, and the raw, unvarnished emotions of the Senate floor.
Navigating this labyrinthine system requires immense patience and relentless curiosity, and we are profoundly grateful that you chose to engage in this deep dive with us today.
Civic education is not a passive endeavor, it is a continuous, active process.
We have provided the synthesis and the analysis, but the primary source documents are publicly available for your own review.
Absolutely. And as a reminder, to help keep this ad-free civic education resource sustainable and independent, please consider using the Buy Me a Coffee link located directly in your deep dive description.
But beyond supporting the show, we want to empower you to take this knowledge and actively apply it.
If you want to verify the exact verbatim wording of any bill we discussed today, visit Congress.gov.
It is an incredibly powerful, free public resource. You can type HR1 or S2877 directly into the search bar and read the exact legislative text.
You can track which specific lawmaker sponsored the bill, monitor exactly where it sits in the committee process, and view the precise roll call data on how your elected representatives voted.
And when you inevitably contact your local representatives, and you absolutely should make your voice heard, specificity is your greatest weapon.
Calling a congressional office and leaving a vague voicemail saying, "I am angry about housing costs," is easily logged and ignored by a junior staffer.
However, calling and stating, "I urge the senator to publicly support the point access block guidelines and the ADU deregulations contained within H.R. 6644, the Housing for the 21st Century Act," alters the dynamic immediately.
It signals to the staff that you are highly informed and watching their actions on specific legislation currently sitting on their desk.
You can also actively monitor upcoming committee markups on these exact bills.
The majority of congressional committee hearings are streamed live, for free, online.
Watching a markup session is the most unfiltered way to observe how the legislative sausage is truly made, as lawmakers debate amendments line by agonizing line.
Finally, we urge you to participate in the democratic process far beyond simply casting a ballot every 2 years, particularly at the hyper-local level.
We spent significant time discussing the federal push in H.R. 6644 to eliminate parking minimums and rewrite local zoning laws to allow for mid-rise apartments.
But the reality is, those specific battles are rarely fought in the halls of Washington. They are fought in the basement of your local town hall.
Attend your local municipal zoning board meeting.
That unassuming room is where the sweeping federal housing policies we analyze actually collide with the pavement in your specific community.
As we conclude our analysis today, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over.
We have spent the last hour examining a stack of documents where, in one piece of legislation, the No Stock Act Congress is fiercely attempting to ban stock trading for themselves in the pursuit of ultimate ethical transparency and public trust.
Yet, in another bill, H.R. 1, they orchestrate a multi-trillion-dollar economic reshuffle, fundamentally rewriting the tax code and dismantling the social safety net through a massive, opaque, all-or-nothing reconciliation package designed specifically to bypass traditional debate and minority input.
It is the ultimate institutional paradox. We demand clean, visible systems, yet accept mechanisms designed to operate in the dark.
Exactly. So the lingering question is this. If our most profoundly impactful laws are increasingly drafted behind closed doors to satisfy the ruthless mathematical demands of budget reconciliation, are we systematically losing the very institutional transparency that high-profile ethics bills are so desperately attempting to create?
It brings us right back to our opening metaphor. You have to look past the pristine blueprints and acknowledge the 50 different architects fighting over the pen.
The reality of reconciliation is muddy, relentlessly complex, and deeply intertwined with political math.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Congress and context. Keep questioning the machinery, keep watching the pendulum swing, and we will see you next time.